Good evening. Tonight we close our eyes and open our minds to the crucible of the ancient world. We travel to a place where a narrow strip of land became the final battleground for the soul of an entire civilization, the Hot Gates, or Thermopylae. This is more than a simple chronicle of a heroic defeat. This is a profound study in the limits of fear, the true meaning of discipline, and the quiet, almost internal act of choosing one's end. This story, so often shouted in glorious cinematic light, is perhaps best understood in the dark, whispered into the quiet corners of the night. Whether you seek slumber or seek truth, I am honored that you have chosen to walk this historical path with me. Let the stillness of the past wash over us as we begin. The age we are exploring, the dawn of the 5th century BC, was a moment of dizzying potential in Greece, overshadowed by an unprecedented, crushing reality. The Persian Empire, ruled by the great King Xerxes, was moving. It was not merely an army. It was an economy, a migratory nation, mobilized and aimed squarely at the fractured brilliance of the Hellenic world. Xerxes was completing the campaign his father, Darius, had started and failed. A campaign to assert a singular global authority. This time, the scale was terrifyingly different. Historians living in the immediate aftermath struggled to capture the size of the invasion. We hear accounts that the army drank rivers dry, that their baggage trains stretched for miles, and that when their ships sailed, they blanketed the sea. The number is irrelevant. The message was clear. Resistance was futile. And fear, that subtle, corrosive force, was doing more damage than any Persian spear. Many Greek city-states capitulated, sending earth and water as symbols of submission, choosing survival over freedom. But a few refused. Among those defiant cities, the tension lay between Athens, the restless, intellectual powerhouse, a city of debate and the newly born democracy, and Sparta, the unyielding, self-contained engine of military perfection. They were antithetical forces, yet bound by the imminent threat. Our focus narrows now to Sparta. It was an anomaly, a society built entirely on a principle. The state is the citizen, and the citizen is the soldier. From the moment a Spartan boy survived the ritual judgment of the elders, his life was not his own. The agoge was the long, severe path that forged boys into the hoplites, those heavy infantry soldiers who wielded the bronze shield and spear. They were deliberately trained to scorn comfort, to endure pain, and above all, to never break ranks. They knew only one defense, the unbreakable phalanx. They had no walls. Their only walls were the bodies and the shields of the men beside them. This Spartan philosophy bred an absolute commitment to the law that governed every aspect of their existence, even when that law seemed to contradict survival. The year was 480 BC. The massive Persian force was closing in on the northern passes. The Greek coalition decided upon Thermopylae as their defensive point, the Hot Gates. This was a place where the mountains dropped sheer to the sea, creating a pass so narrow that only a few men could fight side by side. It was the perfect geological equalizing force, neutralizing the Persian advantage in sheer numbers. But the timing was disastrous. It was the time of the Carneia, a major religious festival for the Spartans. The law forbade any full military expedition during this sacred period, and the Olympic Games, a pan-Hellenic truce, were also underway. The laws of the gods and the traditions of men stood in the path of destiny. Xerxes would not wait. The Spartan government, the ephors and the council of elders, faced an impossible choice: defy the gods and send the entire army, or obey the law and leave all of Greece exposed. Into this deadlock stepped the king, Leonidas. A man already in his 60s, past the prime of life by Athenian standards, yet in Sparta, a king and a warrior of profound experience, Leonidas understood the law. but he also understood strategy, and more importantly, he understood prophecy. A chilling oracle had been delivered. Sparta would either see its city sacked and ruined, or it would mourn a king of the line of Heracles. The oracle's words gave Leonidas the necessary clarity. He couldn't send the full army, but he could take his personal guard, 300 men. Crucially, he chose only those who had already sired sons, men who had secured their family line. These 300 were not just a detachment. They were a ritual sacrifice, a token force designed to delay the enemy just long enough for the rest of Greece to mobilize. While fulfilling the bloody prophecy, Leonidas was not marching to battle. He was marching to an appointment with fate. Along the way, the 300 were joined by approximately 4,000 allies from the Peloponnese and other city-states, including the loyal Thespians. But the core, the steel spine of the defense, was the Spartan commitment. When they arrived at the hot gates, the Persian envoys were sent to demand submission. The message was simple and arrogant: surrender your arms. The Greeks, they were told, would be granted a merciful life under the great king. Leonidas's reply was stark, utterly confident, and would become the defining statement of the entire clash. He said only, "Molon Labe, come and take them." The first 4 days at Thermopylae were spent in tense waiting, the armies watching each other. Xerxes could not comprehend the absurdity of the situation. Why would 7,000 men hold a pass against a force of this magnitude? He was patient, attributing their delay to arrogance or simple stupidity. On the 5th day, Xerxes could wait no longer. He unleashed the first wave of his army, the Medes and the Scythians. These were not his finest troops, but they were numerous, ordered to capture the Greeks alive and bring them to him. The Persians were confident that their numbers would simply overwhelm the defenders. What happened next was a brutal, mechanical lesson in military discipline. The Greeks were arrayed in their phalanx, tightly packed, their shields locked. The Thermopylae pass was barely wide enough for 4 men abreast. The Persian waves crashed against this bronze wall, only to be systematically repulsed. The Spartans, masters of the phalanx maneuver, would feign retreat, drawing the Medes into the narrowest part of the pass, only to instantly turn and smash the charging, disorganized enemy with their long spears. The Medes were cut down, slaughtered by the disciplined, almost bored efficiency of the Spartans. They were fighting, as Herodotus noted, in a manner worthy of men who fight for their lives. Xerxes, in a rage, sent in his elite, the legendary immortals. 10,000 of the great king's finest, named so because their numbers were immediately replenished whenever one fell. If any force could break the Greeks, it was these men. Yet, even the immortals found the phalanx an impassable barrier. They too were forced into the bottleneck of the pass, their numbers useless, their superior armor unable to deflect the deadly rhythm of the Spartan spear thrusts. The battle devolved into a grinding, terrifying meat grinder. The Spartans fought not just with strength, but with a knowledge of the terrain, an absolute unity of movement, and a chilling patience. The immortals, unfamiliar with this kind of close quarters, grinding defensive warfare, suffered appalling losses. Xerxes, watching from his command post, reportedly sprang from his throne in shock 3 times. The very concept of his invincible army being stalled by so few was an existential affront to his power. The soundscape subtly shifts. The ai, the second day of fighting closed, and with it, the hope of a quick victory for Xerxes. The great king, master of millions, was humiliated by a few thousand. His immortals, those legendary warriors, had been stained by mortal blood and defeat. The narrowness of the pass had neutralized his crushing advantage, turning his vast army into a panicked, bottlenecked mob Leonidas had succeeded in what every strategist had deemed impossible. He had bought time, and perhaps more importantly, he had instilled doubt into the heart of the largest empire on earth. But the history of Thermopylae teaches us that even the most perfect defense is vulnerable to a single human flaw. The soundscape subtly shifts. The hour is the sun set on the second bloody day, casting long shadows over the bodies. An event occurred that would forever haunt the history of Greece. A local man, a resident of Malis named Ephialtes, came to the Persian camp. He was driven by motives that history records as simple greed, the promise of a rich reward from Xerxes. And he carried a secret that nullified every act of Spartan heroism. Ephialtes revealed the existence of the Anapia path, a little used winding goat track over the mountains that bypassed the hot gates completely. This path, known only to locals, emerged directly behind the Greek position. It was the crack in the wall, the back door to destiny. Xerxes seized the opportunity with a desperate, manic intensity. That very night, under the cover of the crescent moon, he dispatched a formidable detachment, Persian forces led by General Hydarnes, to traverse the path. Imagine the march. Silent, eerie, a shadow moving over the rugged terrain, avoiding the main pass. This was the moment where the strategic genius of the Spartans was betrayed by the geography of their defense and the fragility of human character. While Leonidas and his men slept or stood guard, trusting the mountains at their back, the instrument of their doom was closing in. Before dawn on the third day, the Greek allies stationed higher up on the mountain path. Phocian soldiers who had volunteered to guard the passage were startled awake by the rustling of leaves and the clang of metal. They scrambled to arm themselves, expecting only a small scouting force. Instead, they faced thousands of Hydarnes' finest. Though the Phocians briefly tried to resist, they were overwhelmed. They fled to a high peak to make a final stand, believing they were the primary target. But the Persians barely noticed them. Their eyes were fixed on the open path to the coast. The news, delivered by a frantic runner at first light, ripped through the Greek camp at the hot gates. They were surrounded. The sacrifice had been compromised. Their purpose, to block the pass, was now futile. Leonidas, the Spartan king, was faced with his final, heaviest decision. He called a council. The rest of the allied Greek forces had fought bravely, but now their mission was over. Staying meant certain annihilation for all of them. Leonidas ordered the main body of the Greek forces, the Corinthians, the Phocians, and the others, to retreat immediately. Their duty was to survive and prepare the defense of the rest of Greece. But Leonidas himself and the 300 Spartans remained. They were joined by the roughly 700 men from Thespiae, led by Demophilus, who refused to abandon the Spartans, and the soldiers from Thebes, whose loyalties were deeply suspect. Why did the Spartans stay? It was not simply a death wish. It was an immutable function of the law. Retreat was impossible. Their very identity was tied to holding the line. By dying here, they ensured that their supreme sacrifice would never be forgotten, giving the rest of Greece the moral courage, the will to fight that they desperately needed. They traded their lives for a legend and for time. The last charge. Knowing they would die, the remaining 1,500 Greeks prepared for their final mourning. Leonidas is said to have joked with his men, perhaps referencing the Persian boast that their arrows would blot out the sun. He is recorded as saying, "Good, then we shall fight in the shade." He ordered his men to eat a final meal, reminding them, "Tonight we dine in Hades." As the sun rose on the third day, the Persians attacked simultaneously from two directions. Xerxes' main force from the front, and Hydarnes' forces pouring down from the path behind Leonidas, knew exactly where to strike. Instead of fighting defensively in the pass, he led his men in a desperate, ferocious charge out into the wider parts of the pass. This was not a defense. It was a final, stunning act of aggression. This move was designed to maximize the Persian casualties, but primarily it was meant to give Xerxes a final, unforgettable display of Spartan valor. Leonidas, fighting at the very front of the battle, fell almost instantly. The moment he dropped, the fiercest fight of the day erupted over his body. The Spartans and Thespians fought like men possess.
A crucible of torment. While still in his cradle, she sent serpents to kill him, and the infant strangled them with his bare hands. Heracles grew into a man of impossible strength, but it was not brute force that defined his legend. It was penance. In a fit of divinely sent madness, Hera's vengeance again, he killed his wife and children. Racked by grief, he sought purification at the Oracle of Delphi. There, he was told to serve Eurystheus, a petty king, and complete 12 labours, each more impossible than the last. He wrestled the Nemean lion, whose hide no blade could pierce. He slew the Lernaean hydra, cauterizing each writhing neck. He captured the Erymanthian boar, cleansed the stables of Algaeus in a single day, drove away the Stymphalian birds, and tamed the Cretan bull. He stole the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, seized the cattle of Geryon, fetched the golden apples of the Hesperides, and descended into Hades to bring back the hound Cerberus. Each trial was more than a feat of strength. They were encounters with death, with the edge of the world, with the very fabric of human suffering. Through them, Heracles became more than a hero. He became a symbol of mortal endurance, of pain redeemed through effort. At his death, poisoned by a robe soaked in the blood of a centaur, he built his own funeral pyre and climbed atop it, mortal no longer. The gods took him to Olympus, where even Hera, at last, accepted him as divine. He became the only mortal to join the pantheon, a god forged in agony. Yet Heracles was not the first demigod, nor the only one whose story shaped the fate of mortals. Long before him came Perseus, another son of Zeus, born of Danae, who was imprisoned in a bronze tower because of a prophecy that her child would kill her father. But fate, once set in motion, cannot be locked away. Zeus came to her not as a man, but as a shower of gold, and from that union Perseus was born. Abandoned at sea in a chest, mother and child survived and were taken in by a kind fisherman. But again, a king's lust, this time Polydectes, who desired Danae, set Perseus on a path of peril. Ordered to bring back the head of Medusa, the Gorgon whose gaze turned men to stone, Perseus embarked on his quest armed by the gods. Hermes gave him a sword, Athena a polished shield. He stole the eye of the Grei, the old Grey sisters who shared one vision among them, and learned the Gorgon's location. With Athena's guidance, he approached as Medusa slept, using the mirror of his shield to strike without looking, and severed her head. From her neck sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a warrior of gold. Perseus escaped with their help, and on his return journey rescued Andromeda from a sea monster, married her, and founded dynasties. His lineage would carry on to Heracles, linking their stories by blood and fate. There were others: Theseus, son of Poseidon, or Aegeus depending on the telling, who slew the Minotaur in the labyrinth of Knossos, bringing Athens into its first taste of empire. Bellerophon, rider of Pegasus, who killed the Chimera but flew too high and fell. Atalanta, raised by bears and swift as the wind, sometimes said to be the daughter of Artemis herself, who raced suitors and killed boars, but was undone by love and distraction. The demigods were never allowed peace. Their blood was too divine for comfort, too mortal for eternity. The gods watched them with pride and fear, for each one tested the boundary between Olympus and earth, and the mortals worshipped them, not just for their triumphs, but for their struggles. They suffered, bled, and sometimes died. But in doing so, they became immortal in a way the gods never could, through story. As the memory of Troy faded, as cities rose and fell, the tales of these children endured. They filled amphorae and temple friezes, echoed in poems and plays. And though the gods remained on Olympus, distant and growing more silent, it was in the lives of their mortal-born children that humanity found its mirrors, flawed, courageous, doomed, and glorious. In the world of Greek myth, power did not rest solely in the hands of gods or heroes. There was something older still, something deeper, humming beneath every choice and every death, every victory and every sorrow. Fate. It was not a god, though the gods themselves feared it. It was not a law, though it governed even the divine. Fate was a truth, a force like gravity, unseen but inescapable, woven into the bones of the world. The Greeks called it Moira, and sometimes she had faces, the Moirai, or Fates, three sisters who spun, measured, and cut the thread of every life. Clotho spun the thread, Lachesis measured its length, and Atropos, the one who could not be turned, cut it when the time came. Even Zeus, king of Olympus, was bound by their decisions. He might thunder and plead, but if Atropos raised her shears, no power in heaven or earth could stay her hand. And so, if fate ruled all, what hope had man? The answer lay in omens and oracles, the strange subtle language of the gods and the signs sent to those who dared to read them. The Greeks did not believe they could change their fates, but they believed they might understand them. To see the future was to brace oneself against it, to try, perhaps vainly, to prepare the soul. The most famous oracle in all of Greece was at Delphi, where Apollo spoke through the Pythia, a woman seated upon a tripod over a steaming chasm in the temple's stone floor. She inhaled vapors, slipped into trance, and delivered the words of the god in riddles and fragments. Kings, generals, and common men came to her, some to seek glory, others merely survival. But her words were never straightforward. Apollo did not deal in certainties. A prophecy, like a blade, could cut both ways. So many stories twisted around her cryptic pronouncements. Croesus, king of Lydia, asked the oracle if he should wage war on the Persians. She told him that if he crossed the river, he would destroy a great empire. He did not realize the empire would be his own. Oedipus, too, was told he would kill his father and marry his mother. His parents tried to thwart the prophecy by abandoning him. He, in turn, fled his supposed home to avoid fulfilling it, only to walk straight into its jaws. The oracle, as always, had been correct. It was men's misinterpretation that doomed them. There were other oracles too, at Dodona, where the rustling of sacred oaks revealed the will of Zeus, at Delos, where Leto gave birth to Apollo and Artemis, at Ammon in Libya, and countless smaller shrines where dreams, animal entrails, birds in flight, or the trembling of a flame gave voice to the unknowable. In war, omens were sought before every battle. A flash of lightning, a flight of crows, a sneeze at the wrong moment. These were not trifles. They were warnings, communications from the divine. A general who ignored them risked not only defeat, but cosmic punishment. Sacrifices were made before sea voyages, births, weddings. The entrails of goats and the livers of oxen were studied by seers, who divined the will of the gods in dark, wet patterns of muscle and blood. The art of reading omens became its own power. Seers like Calchas, who guided the Greeks at Troy, or Tiresias, the blind prophet of Thebes, held influence equal to kings. Tiresias in particular, touched by both male and female life, was said to have lived 7 generations, his wisdom unrivaled, his visions sometimes a curse to those who asked for them. But oracles and omens were not mere superstitions. They represented something deeper, the Greek understanding that mortals were not in control. No matter how mighty the hero, how noble the bloodline, how loyal the heart, the wheel of fate turned ever on. And in that turning, all must one day be broken. The gift of prophecy was not power, it was awareness. And awareness, too late, was often indistinguishable from tragedy. Still, men sought prophecy. They climbed mountain paths to Delphi, brought gold and goat blood, asked questions in trembling voices. For even if fate could not be changed, it could be faced. To know the storm was coming was not to stop it, but it was, perhaps, to die with eyes open. In this tension, between knowledge and helplessness, between the known and the feared, the Greeks found meaning. Their stories were not about victory over destiny, but dignity within it. Even the gods watched the loom of the fates, unable to sever the threads they disliked. Hector knew he would die, and still strapped on his armour. Achilles knew he would not return, and still sailed to Troy. Oedipus sought to flee his doom, and instead ran headlong into it. And the Pythia kept breathing, year after year, whispering riddles in the smoke, her voice the cold breath of a world that had already decided what was to come. To the ancient Greeks, death was not the end of story, but merely the end of breath. What followed was not heaven or hell in the Christian sense, but a realm both more neutral and more ancient, a land beneath the earth where all the dead, great and small, noble and villainous, made their final journey. This place was Hades, named for the god who ruled it, and though it bore no flames, no pitchforks, no horned demons, it inspired a dread so deep that mortals seldom spoke the god's name aloud. They called him instead Pluton, the wealthy one, for all riches, all veins of silver and gold, came from beneath the earth, and so too did the dead. The geography of the underworld was shaped not by logic, but by myth and memory. At its threshold ran the 5 rivers: Styx, the river of hatred and sacred oaths; Acheron, the river of sorrow; Phlegethon, of fire; Cocytus, of lamentation; and Lethe, of forgetfulness. Each marked a boundary not only physical but spiritual. The dead arrived as shadows, Suchai, breathless and bloodless, stripped of voice and form, and crossed into Hades with the help of Charon, the ferryman. For a coin, he would row them across Acheron. Those without proper burial, those who could not pay, were left to wander the shores for 100 years, whispering and weeping. Upon entry, the souls were met by Cerberus, the 3-headed hound who kept the dead in and the living out. Beyond him stretched the plains of Asphodel, grey and dim, where most souls drifted in forgetful silence, murmuring like dry leaves. But not all fates were equal. The underworld had its judges, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Iarchus, who weighed each soul. The truly wicked were cast into Tartarus, a chasm of torment deeper than even the Titan's prison, where oath-breakers, murderers, and traitors suffered torments crafted to mirror their crimes. Sisyphus rolled his stone, Tantalus thirsted forever beside unreachable water, and Ixion spun upon his fiery wheel. The rare few deemed worthy of reward passed to the Elysian fields, a paradise of soft winds, green meadows, and perpetual spring. There, heroes might linger in comfort, their memories intact, their deeds honoured. Still fewer souls might choose to be reborn, passing through the river Lethe to forget their past lives, beginning the cycle anew. In later mystery religions, a soul might even hope to escape the wheel entirely and ascend to the stars, but such fates were rare and uncertain. At the heart of this realm stood Hades, stern and silent, a king without vanity. He did not seek worship, did not interfere in the affairs of mortals. He simply ruled, and he ruled absolutely. His realm did not change, and he preferred it that way. He was not evil, as later myths would paint him, but immovable, indifferent, the shadow cast by Zeus's storm and Poseidon's tide. And by his side stood Persephone, queen of the underworld, whose story, perhaps more than any other, reveals the strange duality of death in Greek thought. Persephone was the daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest. One spring day, as she gathered flowers, the earth split open, and Hades rose in his chariot. He took her, swiftly and without consent, down into his realm. Demeter, in her grief, let the earth wither. Crops failed, rivers dried, famine swept across the land. No prayer could sway her. She would not let the world grow green again until her daughter was returned. At last, Zeus sent Hermes to retrieve Persephone. But because she had eaten pomegranate seeds, 6 of them, or perhaps just 1, she was bound to Hades. The compromise became a myth for the seasons. Persephone would spend part of the year in the underworld, and during those months, Demeter would grieve and the world would grow cold. When Persephone returned, the earth would bloom. Life and death became a cycle, not a sentence. Over time, Persephone's role evolved. No longer merely a captive, she became a ruler in her own right. A queen of mysteries who walked among the shades with quiet authority. In the Eleusinian mysteries, the great secret rites held outside Athens, her descent and return were reenacted each year, promising not only the return of the grain, but the hope of renewal for the soul. The underworld was not entirely sealed. A few mortals journeyed there and lived to tell of it. Orpheus sang his way past Cerberus and charmed Hades and Persephone, only to lose Eurydice with a backward glance. Heracles brought Cerberus to the surface. Odysseus, guided by Circe, sacrificed to the dead and called up the ghosts of Tiresias, Achilles, Agamemnon. Each one told him that death was not glorious, only final. Better to be a slave in life than a king among shades, said Achilles, once the greatest of the Greeks. And so the Greeks built their tombs with care. They buried the dead with coins for Charon, with weapons, wine, and songs. They poured libations and made offerings at the family hearth, for the dead were never truly gone. They haunted dreams, sent signs, and sometimes, through rites and blood, could even be called back for answers best left unspoken. The underworld